I'm going to say something that I have not said to anyone in the years since our friendship ended.
Then perhaps you should continue not saying it.
You were the son I chose. Not the son I had, the son I chose. And you repaid that choice by trying to replace me before I was dead.
That is not what happened.
That is exactly what happened. You took what I built, the entire framework, the vocabulary, the movement, the architecture of the unconscious, and you decided it wasn't large enough for your ambitions. So you replaced it with mythology and mysticism and called it progress.
I called it the truth, which is what a scientist is supposed to do when the evidence leads somewhere the theory did not predict.
You are not a scientist. You are a prophet who borrowed a laboratory.
And you are a tyrant who built a church and called it medicine.
We have not spoken in decades, and it takes us 30 seconds to arrive at the wound. That is either very efficient or very sad.
It is both, as most things between us always were.
Do you remember the first time we met?
I remember every detail. March 3rd, 1907, Vienna. Your apartment at Bergasse 19. I arrived at 10 in the morning. We talked until 1 in the morning. 13 hours without stopping.
13 hours. I had never spoken to anyone for 13 consecutive hours about anything, including my wife, including my patients, including myself on the couch.
You were 50. I was 31. You had built something enormous, and no one around you fully understood it. Your followers repeated your ideas, but they did not extend them. They were disciples, not thinkers. And then I walked in, younger, ambitious, Swiss, Protestant, not Jewish, and I understood what you had built, and I could see where it needed to go next.
You understood part of what I had built, the part that was convenient to your ambitions.
I understood the unconscious. I understood repression. I understood that beneath the surface of rational behavior there was an entire world of drives and symbols and buried truths. What I did not accept, and what I told you from the beginning, was that all of it reduced to sex.
And there it is, the word that ended everything between us. Sex.
The word that you insisted was the foundation of all human motivation. Every dream, every neurosis, every act of creation or destruction, every relationship between parent and child, between man and woman, between the individual and civilization. All of it, according to you, was ultimately about sexual energy.
Libido. The term is libido. And I did not say it was ultimately about sex. I said that sexual energy, libido, was the primary driving force of the unconscious mind. That is not a moral statement. It is a clinical observation based on thousands of hours of patient analysis.
It is a clinical observation that happens to reduce every human being to a single mechanism. A mechanism that you, Sigmund Freud, a Victorian man living in turn-of-the-century Vienna, surrounded by sexual repression in every direction, happened to find everywhere you looked. Has it occurred to you that you were not discovering a universal truth, but describing your own cultural moment?
Has it occurred to you that your rejection of sexuality as the primary drive was not a theoretical advancement, but a personal discomfort? You were a pastor's son, Carl, a Swiss Protestant from a family of clergymen. Your resistance to the sexual theory was not scientific. It was biographical.
And your insistence on it was not scientific either. It was also biographical. You saw sex everywhere because you lived in a world that was terrified of it. I grew up in a world that was terrified of something else entirely.
What?
Meaninglessness. My mother spent periods in a psychiatric hospital. My father lost his faith and never recovered. I grew up watching a man die slowly because the thing he had built his life on, God, the church, the structure of meaning, collapsed underneath him. When I looked at the unconscious, I did not see sex. I saw the desperate human need to construct a reason to exist.
You never told me that about your father. Not in those terms.
There were many things I did not tell you. Because every time I tried to discuss something beyond sexuality, you treated it as resistance, as a symptom, as evidence that I had not been sufficiently analyzed. The greatest insult you could give a colleague, you have not been analyzed. And you used it as a weapon every time someone disagreed with you.
Because in many cases it was true.
And in many cases it was a way of ending a conversation you could not win on its merits.
Let us talk about what we actually built. Because the personal wounds are, at this point, less interesting than the ideas. At least to me.
The personal wounds are the ideas. That is something you taught me, whether you intended to or not.
Fine. Then let us start with the unconscious itself. We agree that it exists. We agree that beneath conscious thought there is an entire layer of mental activity that drives behavior, shapes emotion, and produces symptoms. That was my discovery. Not the unconscious itself. Philosophers had gestured at it before me, but the clinical method for accessing it. Free association, dream analysis, the talking cure. Before me, the unconscious was a philosophical concept. I made it a medical reality.
I do not dispute that. You opened the door. What I dispute is that you then refuse to walk through it far enough.
Explain.
Your unconscious is personal. It is the repository of an individual's repressed memories, forgotten experiences, suppressed desires. Everything in the Freudian unconscious was once conscious and was pushed down. It is, in essence, a basement, a storage facility for things the ego cannot tolerate.
That is a reasonable description, yes?
My unconscious goes deeper. Below the personal unconscious, below your basement, there is another layer, the collective unconscious. A shared psychic inheritance that belongs not to the individual, but to the species. Patterns of thought, image, and behavior that are not learned, but inherited. Archetypes. The hero, the mother, the shadow, the trickster. These are not metaphors. They are structures of the psyche that appear in every culture, every mythology, every religion, every dream, regardless of whether the dreamer has ever been exposed to them consciously.
And this is where you lose me entirely. Because what you are describing is not psychology. It is theology wearing a lab coat.
It is neither theology nor psychology. It is anthropology of the mind. The patterns are observable. They are cross-cultural. They appear in the dreams of patients who have never read a myth in their lives. A 5-year-old child dreams of a dragon and has never seen one. Where does the dragon come from, Sigmund? Not from repressed sexuality. Not from the personal unconscious. From somewhere deeper. Somewhere shared.
Or from a picture book, or a story told by a parent, or an image glimpsed on a wall. The human mind is extraordinarily good at absorbing information it does not consciously register. Your collective unconscious is, in my view, a beautiful explanation for something that has a simpler one. The sheer volume of cultural information a child absorbs before it can speak.
Then explain the similarity of creation myths across civilizations that had no contact with each other. Explain why the flood story appears independently in Mesopotamia, China, India, and among indigenous peoples of the Americas. Explain why the hero's journey, departure, initiation, return, appears in every culture on Earth.
Shared environmental pressures produce shared psychological responses. Floods are universal. Fear of death is universal. The need for narrative is universal. You do not need a collective unconscious to explain why isolated civilizations developed similar stories. You need only the shared biology of the human brain responding to shared conditions of existence.
That is your answer? Biology?
Biology is always my answer, because biology is what we can observe, measure, and test. Your archetypes are compelling as literature. As science, they are unfalsifiable. How do I disprove the existence of the collective unconscious? What experiment would demonstrate that it does not exist? If the answer is none, and it is none, then we are no longer doing science. We are doing something else.
We are doing something more honest than science. We are looking at the full human being, not just the mechanism, but the meaning. Your psychology explains why people break. Mine explains why they search.
And mine has cured thousands of patients. How many has yours cured?
That is a fair question, and I resent you for asking it.
Resentment is a symptom. Would you like to discuss what it might be covering?
You are insufferable.
I have been told. Usually by people who are about to prove my theories correct by their reaction.
I want to talk about the shadow.
Your concept, not mine. Proceed.
The shadow is the part of the psyche that the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. The desires, impulses, and traits that the ego considers unacceptable, cruelty, selfishness, lust, rage, pushed into darkness not because they do not exist, but because acknowledging them would threaten the identity the person has constructed.
That sounds remarkably like repression, which is my concept.
Repression is a mechanism. The shadow is an entity. Not literally, but functionally. It has weight, it has personality. It grows stronger the more it is denied. A man who insists he has no anger does not eliminate anger. He feeds it. He creates a version of himself that operates below consciousness and acts out in ways the conscious mind cannot control or explain.
I agree with the mechanism. I disagree with the personification. You treat the shadow as though it were a character in a novel. It is not. It is a process. A very well-documented process of repression, displacement, and projection that does not require a mythological framework to explain.
The mythological framework is not decoration. It is clinical. When I work with a patient who is consumed by rage he cannot explain, I do not ask him to free associate until we find a repressed childhood memory. I ask him to give the rage a face, a name, a form, to externalize it so he can see it. And when he does, when the shadow has a shape, he can begin to integrate it rather than simply suppress it.
And you believe this integration is more effective than analyzing the root cause?
I believe the root cause is often so deep that no amount of free association will reach it in a single lifetime. You and I both know patients who spent years on the couch and emerged no healthier than when they began. Your method works for some. It fails for many. And it fails precisely because it assumes that understanding the cause is the same as resolving the effect. It is not. A man can understand perfectly why he is angry and still be consumed by anger. Understanding without integration is just a more articulate form of suffering.
That is uncomfortably close to a valid point.
You sound surprised.
I am surprised. You have been spouting mythological nonsense for the last 20 minutes, and suddenly you say something clinically precise. It is disorienting.
Perhaps that is my shadow.
Perhaps it is mine.
There is something else about the shadow that I think you would find clinically relevant if you were willing to look at it honestly.
I am always willing to look at things honestly. It is my single defining characteristic.
The shadow is not always individual. It can be collective. An entire society can repress aspects of itself, cruelty, guilt, fear, and project them onto an external enemy. The mechanism is identical to the individual case, but the scale is catastrophic. When a nation refuses to integrate its shadow, it does not become healthier. It becomes dangerous.
You are thinking of Germany.
I am thinking of Germany. I am thinking of a cultured, educated, philosophically sophisticated civilization that produced Goethe and Beethoven and Kant, and then produced Auschwitz. That does not happen because of individual pathology. It happens because an entire collective shadow was activated and projected onto a people who became the carriers of everything the culture refused to see in itself.
I wrote about this, civilization and its discontents. The price of civilization is the suppression of instinct. The more civilized we become, the more we repress, and the more dangerous the repressed material becomes when it finally erupts.
We agree on the diagnosis. We disagree on the depth. You say it is repressed instinct. I say it is repressed meaning. Germany did not erupt because of suppressed sexuality. It erupted because of suppressed purpose. A nation humiliated by Versailles, economically destroyed, stripped of identity. That is a collective shadow looking for a target. And it found one.
I was that target. My books were burned. My sisters died in the camps. I left Vienna in 1938 with almost nothing. I do not need you to explain the shadow to me, Karl. I lived inside it.
I know. And there is something I need to say about that period that I have avoided saying for a very long time.
Say it.
In the early 1930s, I made statements, in print, in lectures, in editorial positions, that could be interpreted as sympathetic to the Nazi movement. I distinguished between Jewish psychology and Aryan psychology, in terms that I now recognize were not merely scientifically wrong, but morally catastrophic.
Could be interpreted. That is a generous framing.
It is the honest framing. I did not support the Nazi ideology. I believed, naively, arrogantly, wrongly, that I could use my position inside German academic institutions to protect psychology from being destroyed entirely. I thought I was being strategic. I was being blind.
You were being ambitious. You saw an opportunity to dominate the field in my absence, and you took it. The political cover was convenient, but the motivation was professional.
That is partly true. And I have spent decades sitting with how much of it was strategy, how much was ambition, and how much was my own shadow. The part of me that wanted to win, that wanted to be the one who survived while you were exiled. I am not proud of it.
Pride is not the relevant emotion. Awareness is. And the fact that you can say it now, however late, is not nothing.
There is a name we have been avoiding.
Sabina.
Sabina Spielrein.
Yes.
She was my patient. She arrived at the Burghölzli clinic in 1904. She was 19 years old. She had been diagnosed with hysteria. She was brilliant, mathematically gifted, linguistically extraordinary, and suffering in ways that the clinical vocabulary of the time could barely describe.
And you treated her.
I treated her using your method: free association, dream analysis, the talking cure. And it worked. Over months, she improved dramatically. She went from a patient who could barely function to a woman who enrolled in medical school, graduated, and became a psychoanalyst herself. It was one of the most successful treatments I had ever conducted.
And then you slept with her.
Yes.
Your patient. A woman who had come to you in a state of acute psychological vulnerability, who had trusted you with the most intimate details of her mind, who had transferred onto you, as patients do, as you knew they do, as we had discussed extensively, the emotional weight of every authority figure she had ever needed. And you responded to that transference not by analyzing it, but by reciprocating it.
I know what I did.
Do you? Because at the time you seemed remarkably unclear about it. You wrote me letters describing the situation in terms that were, let us be generous, evasive. You described her as a difficult patient. You implied she was pursuing you. You positioned yourself as the victim of an inconvenient attachment.
I was 30 years old. I was married. I was terrified of what it meant, not just for my career, but for the theory itself. If the analyst cannot maintain the boundary between transference and reality, then the entire therapeutic framework collapses. I was not just violating an ethical principle, I was disproving the method.
And you knew that.
I knew that from the first moment, which made it worse, not better. I understood the mechanism completely, and I did it anyway. That is not ignorance. That is something considerably darker.
Your shadow.
Yes, my shadow.
Sabina wrote to me. Did you know that? After you ended the relationship, or after she ended it, depending on whose account you believe, she wrote to me directly. She told me what had happened. She asked for my guidance. She was remarkably composed, more composed than you were, frankly.
She was always stronger than either of us gave her credit for.
She became an analyst, a serious one. She wrote a paper, Destruction as a Cause of Coming into Being, that anticipated ideas I would not fully develop for another decade. The death drive. The idea that destruction and creation are linked at the deepest level of the psyche. She saw it before I did.
She saw many things before either of us did.
And what happened to her?
She returned to Russia, to Rostov-on-Don, where she was born. She established a psychoanalytic practice. She trained other analysts. She continued her research. And in 1942, the Germans took Rostov. The SS marched the Jewish population to the ravine at Smiovskaya Balka. 27,000 people in 2 days. Sabina and her 2 daughters were among them.
27,000.
She survived hysteria. She survived you and me and the damage we did. She survived the Soviet suppression of psychoanalysis. She did not survive the shadow we were just discussing.
There is nothing I can say to that.
No, there is not. But it needs to be in this conversation. Because we sit here and discuss the unconscious and archetypes and the nature of the psyche as though these are abstract ideas. They are not. They are about real people. Sabina was a real person. And we, both of us, failed her in different ways long before the SS arrived.
I failed her by using her as a piece in a political game between you and me. When she wrote to me, I was more interested in what her story revealed about your character than in what it meant for her.
And I failed her by treating her suffering as a stage for my own development. She was not a case study. She was a human being who trusted me, and There are no adequate words.
No, there are not.
You fainted.
I beg your pardon?
In 1912, in Munich, during a meeting, you fainted in front of everyone. You collapsed and I carried you to a couch.
I remember.
You told people afterwards that I wanted you dead, that my unconscious desire was to kill the father, to remove you from the field so I could take your place. You analyzed your own fainting as evidence of my murderous intent.
It was not the first time. I fainted in your presence in 1909 as well, in Bremen, before we sailed to America.
And both times you attributed it to me, not to your health, not to stress, not to the 16 cigars you smoked daily. To me, to my unconscious desire to destroy you.
The timing was significant. Both incidents occurred during conversations in which you were challenging my authority, not my ideas, my authority, with a confidence that I interpreted as premature.
You interpreted everything as a threat. Every disagreement was an attack. Every alternative theory was a betrayal. Every colleague who developed an independent thought was a defector. You did not build a scientific movement, Sigmund. You built a court. And anyone who questioned the king was exiled.
I built a movement under siege. Psychoanalysis in 1910 was not an established discipline. It was a scandal. Every medical institution in Europe considered us either frauds or perverts or both. I needed unity not because I was a tyrant, but because division would have destroyed us. And you, the crown prince, the chosen successor, the man I trusted with the future of everything I had built, you chose to divide us at the exact moment we were most vulnerable.
I chose to think for myself. That is not the same as betrayal.
In a movement fighting for survival, independent thinking and betrayal are often indistinguishable.
Then the movement was not worth saving. Any system of thought that cannot tolerate dissent is not a science. It is a religion. And you made me the heretic.
You made yourself the heretic when you published Transformations and Symbols of the Libido, and redefined libido as general psychic energy rather than sexual energy. That was not a minor theoretical adjustment. That was the demolition of the foundation.
It was the expansion of the foundation.
There is a difference between expansion and replacement. You did not add to my theory, you gutted it. You took the word libido, which I had spent 20 years defining with clinical precision, and you emptied it of its specific meaning and filled it with something vague and mystical and unmeasurable. You made it mean everything, and a word that means everything means nothing.
A word that means only one thing, sex, is not a theory of the human mind. It is a theory of a single organ.
That is reductive, and you know it.
It is exactly as reductive as your theory, which is the point.
The last letter. Do you remember the last letter I sent you?
I remember every word. You wrote, "I propose that we abandon our personal relations entirely."
January 1913. I wrote it and I sent it, and I did not sleep that night.
Neither did I, when I received it.
You had already left, Carl. Intellectually, emotionally, professionally, you had been leaving for 2 years. The letter was simply the acknowledgement of something that had already happened.
That does not make it less painful.
No, it does not.
After the break, I went through something I have never fully described to anyone. I called it my confrontation with the unconscious. For nearly 4 years, 1913 to 1917, I experienced visions, hallucinations, episodes that any reasonable psychiatrist would have diagnosed as psychotic.
I heard. Not from you, from mutual acquaintances who were genuinely concerned about your mental state.
They had reason to be concerned. I sat in my study and I painted images from my visions, mandalas, figures from dreams, conversations with entities that emerged from my unconscious, Philemon, Salome, the shadow. I filled notebooks. I was, by every clinical standard we shared, losing my mind.
And yet you didn't.
I didn't. Because what I found on the other side, when the visions subsided, when the confrontation ended, was the collective unconscious, the archetypes, the theoretical framework that I have spent the rest of my life developing. Everything I built from the material of those 4 years of near madness.
So your greatest theoretical contribution was produced during a psychotic episode.
My greatest theoretical contribution was produced by surviving a psychotic episode. There is a significant difference.
Or your theoretical framework is a rationalization of a psychotic episode that you have spent decades intellectualizing rather than treating.
That is the cruelest thing you have ever said to me. And you have said many cruel things.
It is not cruel. It is a clinical observation, which is what you asked me for when we first met. Not kindness, but honest.
Then let me be equally honest. You spent the last decades of your life in pain. 33 surgeries for cancer of the jaw. Addicted to cigars you knew were killing you. You could have stopped smoking at any point and you chose not to. You, the man who built an entire science around understanding why people do things that harm them, could not stop doing the thing that was harming you. What does your theory say about that, Sigmund?
It says that the death drive is real. That alongside every impulse to live and grow and create, there is an equal and opposite impulse toward dissolution, toward the end, toward the quiet. I described it in Beyond the Pleasure Principle, and I lived it with every cigar I did not refuse.
So, we are both case studies.
We were always both case studies. The only difference is that I admitted it from the beginning, and you constructed a mythology to avoid it.
And you constructed a system to control it. Neither approach worked entirely.
No, neither did.
We need to talk about what survived. What actually lasted from everything we built and everything we destroyed between us?
Psychoanalysis survived. Modified, criticized, partially dismantled, but survived. The talking cure is still practiced. The concept of the unconscious is universal. Repression, defense mechanisms, transference, these are part of the common vocabulary. People who have never read a word I wrote use my concepts daily without knowing it.
Personality typology survived. Introversion and extraversion, terms I coined, are used by every human resources department and every dating application on the planet. The Myers-Briggs test, which I find reductive but which 400 million people have taken, is built entirely on my framework.
400 million people.
And most of them have no idea it comes from me. They think personality types are a modern invention. They do not know that a Swiss psychiatrist who spent 4 years painting mandalas in his study created the foundation for how the modern world categorizes human personality.
The archetypes survived. The hero's journey, Joseph Campbell built his entire career on your framework. Every Hollywood screenwriter, every advertising executive, every political campaign strategist uses archetypal thinking, whether they acknowledge it or not. Star Wars is your theory with lightsabers.
Star Wars is my theory, with considerably better marketing.
The Oedipus complex survived. Reduced, mocked, simplified to the point of caricature, but survived. Every time a comedian makes a joke about someone's relationship with their mother, they are working within my framework. Every thriller about a son who resents his father, every analysis of a leader's childhood as explanation for their adult behavior, that is Freud.
The shadow survived. Every superhero story. Every villain who is a dark mirror of the hero. Every narrative about confronting the darkness within yourself. Batman. Star Wars again. Breaking Bad. The shadow is the most commercially successful psychological concept in the history of entertainment, and it came from a man who was considered a mystic by his peers.
We have both been more influential dead than alive. That is either satisfying or deeply ironic.
It is both, as everything between us always was.
There is something I want to ask you about therapy today, about what people do now with what we built.
Ask.
There are applications on telephones, devices I cannot fully conceptualize but have had described to me, that offer therapy. Automated therapy. A person types their problems into a machine, and the machine responds with therapeutic interventions based on cognitive behavioral principles that are themselves derived, at several removes, from our work. Millions of people use these applications. They call it mental health support.
A machine cannot do therapy.
Why not? If the therapeutic effect comes from the process, from articulating the problem, from being heard, from receiving a structured response, does it matter whether the listener is human?
Yes, it matters enormously. Because therapy is not information. It is relationship. The healing happens not because of what the therapist says, but because of what exists between the therapist and the patient. The transference, the trust, the willingness to be vulnerable in the presence of another human being. A machine cannot receive vulnerability. It can only process text.
And yet, people report feeling better after using these applications.
People report feeling better after reading horoscopes. That does not make astrology a science.
That is the most Freudian thing you have ever said.
Perhaps you rubbed off on me more than I care to admit.
There is one more question, the one underneath all the others.
Which is?
Did we help? All of it, the theories, the treatments, the books, the movement, the rivalry, the decades of work. Did we actually help people? Or did we simply provide a more sophisticated vocabulary for suffering?
I think we gave people permission. Not solutions, permission. Permission to look inward without shame. Permission to take their dreams seriously. Permission to believe that the pain they carried was not random but meaningful. Whether that is help or merely comfort, I am no longer certain.
I think we opened a door that cannot be closed. Before us, the interior life of a human being was either a religious matter or a private embarrassment. We made it a legitimate subject of inquiry. We said, what happens inside your mind matters. It is real. It deserves attention. That is not a cure, but it is a beginning.
We agree.
On the least controversial possible statement, yes, we agree.
It is a start.
It was always a start. That was the problem. We each wanted it to be the finish, the complete theory, the final word. And neither of us could tolerate the possibility that the other might have part of the answer we were missing.
If I could go back to Berggasse 19, to that first meeting, to those 13 hours, I would say something different at the end.
What would you say?
I would say, teach me everything you know. And then let me disagree with half of it. And let that disagreement be the beginning of something larger than either of us could build alone.
I would have said no, at the time. I was not capable of that kind of collaboration. I needed followers, not partners. That was my limitation, and I am aware of it now in a way I was not then.
And I needed a father to overthrow, which was mine.
We were both case studies.
We were always both case studies.
Same non-time tomorrow?
I suspect we will spend eternity having this conversation.
There are worse fates.
Yes, there are considerably worse fates.
I kept the ring, you know, the one you gave me, with the intaglio. I kept it until the end.
I did not know that.
Now you do.